Hey everyone, it's Peter from Full Spectrum Performance, and today I'm going to teach you how to make seitan, also known as wheat meat. It's going to be delicious. Let's get to it. So we're going to start off with our dry ingredients. We have 1.5 cup of vital wheat gluten, a 1/2 cup of nutritional yeast, and a 1/2 cup of whole wheat flour. Now we're using whole wheat flour today because it provides more of a steak or beef-like texture, essentially just a sturdier loaf. Now you can use different types of flour. A chickpea flour or a regular white flour will provide something like a ground turkey or chicken, and if you use a lighter flour like a rice flour, it can turn it into more of a seafood or a lighter texture. It really just depends on what you're feeling. Now you want to make sure you don't get any water on the vital wheat gluten because that's when it's going to start to react. So you want to make sure you're really just focusing on dry ingredients right now. Now for the seasonings, we're going to have 1 tablespoon of garlic powder, 1 tablespoon of cumin powder, and 1 tablespoon of onion powder. These seasonings on the outside edge, you're going to have 1 teaspoon of basil flakes, turmeric, oregano flakes, paprika, chili powder, and here we're using rosemary. Adds a little savory flavor. And here you have a 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper, and here we're using Himalayan salt, but you can just use regular salt. Now we're going to mix all of the dry ingredients together, and you're just going to want to make sure you shake off your bowl. You don't want to lose any of those seasonings in there. Never miss out on that flavor. You gotta get every little last flake. And seriously, you just don't want to waste your food. Seasonings can be expensive depending on which one you're using, so you might as well not waste any. It's your money. Now here, you're going to want to use something flat so you don't mix up all of the seasoning so it doesn't splash up or anything. Alright, everything is all mixed together. You always just want to make sure you get all the dry ingredients really thoroughly mixed before you do anything else. And here we have the wet ingredients. Now mixed together we already have 2 tablespoons of low sodium soy sauce, 1 tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce, and 1.5 cup of homemade veggie broth. Now depending on what broth you use, it's really going to determine the flavor of the seitan itself. And this is just because you're using it to bind it together and you're also using some of it to bake. So depending on what kind of broth you're using, it's really going to imprint that flavor into the seitan itself. Now, the next reason why you have the ingredients set aside is because vital wheat gluten is highly reactive to water. So the moment you dump it in there, it's going to start reacting and binding together. So for here, we actually want to do this rather quickly. Now, the moment you drop it in there, it's going to start clumping together. So you want to start to make sure that you get everything moving the moment you get that liquid in there. So as you can see, you just really want to kind of stir and mix it together. Now it's going to start binding pretty quick, so just toss in the dry stuff that's still on top and really just mix it until a nice dough comes together. And as you can see, really just working the dough, just scraping it, it almost turns into a Play-Doh-esque structure. It's not the most appetizing term to use, but it's something that you can play with. It's going to be a nice rigid dough and it's not going to stick to your hands. So this is a really good opportunity to play with food, and you can't over knead it. That's the best thing about it. So if you have kids, this is a great opportunity to be like, hey guys, mix this. So if you got them, put them to work. Now the coolest thing about this here is, as you can see, just with the spoon, just no reason to be gentle, just kind of shove it in there. You get physical with the dough. And as you can see, it just kind of slides right off once you kind of get that extra moisture going. Whoop, and can't miss out. And when you get down to it, you really just want to get any of that extra dough that may still be sticking to the bowl and really just kind of spread it off with your finger and just put it into the ball. It'll stick right to itself. The gluten bonds are really strong at this point, so you don't really have to worry about anything falling off. And we're just going to get one little final knead in. Now, if you found that the dough is a little too wet and it's really sticking to your hand and all the surfaces, what I recommend is just adding more vital wheat gluten. Just sprinkle it in little by little because you don't want to add too much. And just the opposite problem, if you're finding that the dough is just kind of not sticking together and it's crumbly, it just means that you don't have enough moisture in there. And for the moisture, you really want to add little by little. So I recommend adding anywhere from 1 to 2 tablespoons to a quarter cup at a time. Really just add it gradually until you notice that it starts to get that texture that you're looking for. Now you should have a nice firm, heavier ball of dough at this point, and a good test just to make sure that all those gluten bonds are really starting to work is just to really grab it and give it a nice rip in the middle and just see how long it takes for those strands to fall apart. You see how there's just that much tension in there? It just means those gluten fibers are really strong. And everything else, just kind of push it and mush it back together. And really up until all that dough on your hand works back onto the dough itself. And even here, there's not that much left, so the dough is pretty much done. Now in terms of total knead time, I would say honestly like maybe 5 to 10 minutes. 5 minutes is enough. If you're really short on time, you can just mix it all together and then just immediately kind of go into the next step that we're going to go into right here. Now that that dough is all ready, we're going to let it sit for a little bit. So we're going to set our loaf aside and grab our baking dish. Today we're using a 9x9, and I really just like using a square dish because it makes the seitan loaf easier to cut and distribute after you're done baking. Now here we're using a vegan butter. You're going to want to really just make sure you add some layer of fat in between the pan and the loaf itself. So today we're using vegan butter, but you can use oil, avocado oil, and from here you're just going to want to slather up the inside of that dish. Just really make sure you get into the actual cracks and creases of whatever pan you're using, because when you're forming the loaf, you're going to be pressing down on it, and you don't want any of it sticking to the pan while it's baking. Okay, and now we're going to take our dough, and from here you want to just kind of flatten it out into a little bit of a disc or a big hockey puck. Just makes it easier to push down to the corners, just so you're starting off with a flatter surface. Now from here, you really want to make sure you're digging and pushing down into those corners, because the dough is going to want to shrink and contract on you. So just really kind of spread it out and up and into the corner or the grooves of whatever baking dish you're using, just so you get a nice uniform dough. So just make sure you're pushing it out, getting it nice and flat, because of course you want it to bake evenly. So you want to make sure you're trying to make it as level as possible. And each dough is going to be different, so you're just going to want to play with it. So our 30 minutes is up, and as you can see, the loaf has risen. It's nice and bubbly. The aromas are excellent. Now what we need to do is drain some of these excess juices so the rest of the loaf can actually crisp and brown, get a nice skin, and that's going to make it a little bit more lean of a texture. So from here, what you want to do is just grab the dish with some nice safety mechanisms. Here we're just using hot pads, and you should be able to just press down gently with your thumbs. If not, you can always use a knife or a spoon, and then just go ahead and angle that tray and drain it so you just get those nice extra savory reduction of a veggie broth that is going to be left over from this. And from here you can use this in any type of dish you want. I like to use this for soups or maybe even quick tomato sauces. It just adds an extra meaty, hearty, savory flavor to whatever dish you want to add it into. You can even use it for another sauce for the seitan itself when you're done. Now it's okay if you don't get all the liquid, but again, you just want to kind of jostle it around, make sure you get as much as you can. Alright, so this has actually been in the oven for 30 minutes. As you can see, I like a nice little crispy dark brown layer on that loaf. And from the touch on the outside, that's cooked. Now what you're going to want to do here though is there's still going to be some moisture built up on the bottom of that loaf. And for me, I just like to have a nice crispy texture on that outer layer itself. So what we're going to do is use a baking sheet to flip the loaf over. From here, just remove that there. And as you can see, all that steam just escaped. That's what we're going to now kind of cook out, just so it gets a nice little crispy layer on the top of that loaf. And from here, I'm just going to toss this in the oven for another 10 minutes tops. It's really just to crisp up that outer layer some more. And as you can see, our seitan loaf is nice and browned evenly on top and bottom. Now we're going to let this rest for an additional 10 to 15 minutes. And we're going to do that by simply flipping it just like we did earlier with the baking sheet. And from there, we're gonna just let it cool. Now, at this point, if you want to eat it, you're ready to go. Just make sure you don't miss out on any of those really tasty crumbly bits in the pan, because these are delicious. Hope you guys enjoyed the seitan loaf, because I do. Maybe I'll have to make my seitan bacon in the next episode. Ooh, that'll be tasty. See you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, a share, but don't forget to hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you don't miss out on any future content from myself and Full Spectrum Performance. Most importantly, please leave a comment. Your input and insight is greatly appreciated and helps us create better content for you. If you haven't yet, be sure to check out our social media pages below because we post awesome content daily. Thank you for watching and have a great morning, evening, or night.